We have finally made it to the most famous philosopher of all time, Aristotle. Aristotle was such an intellectually dominant force that the only entity that could match his explicit influence was the Catholic Church itself. And that isn't just in philosophy, but also in science. What kind of mind can make a man as influential as the most powerful religious institution of all time? What kind of ideas did this polymath genius wield? Aristotle was born in Macedonia in 384 BC. To paint a picture, Macedonia was like the Texas of ancient Greece. His father was Macedonia's royal physician, which was likely a big influence on his later ideas. He was sent to Athens around the age of 17 to study at Plato's academy. There he stayed until his 40s when Plato died. A while after Plato's death, Aristotle was invited to the Macedonian capital to tutor the young Alexander. Some of you had a problem with the way I drew Alexander. You thought to yourselves, wait a minute, that stick figure doesn't look like the real Alexander. Alexander couldn't have possibly been 10, and he didn't have stick arms. Frankly, I expected better art from this channel. Now I've pondered on my mistakes, and you're right about all of it. I need to take my role as an educator more seriously. So I searched all the archives of the world for every statue, depiction, and description I could find, and I drew him with perfect accuracy. You're welcome. And what was his contribution to the story? Nothing really. Alexander the Great was probably one of the most influential leaders, and Aristotle was probably the most influential Greek philosopher, yet very little is known about their relationship. Much of it is shrouded in what are likely fabrications. Aristotle only tutored him for about 3 years. But it appears within those 3 years he instilled some very important values: a respect for botany and zoology, and the belief that other races are naturally inferior. However, this video isn't about the racist adventures of Aristotle and Alexander. It's about Aristotle's philosophy. To understand Aristotle, I think it's necessary to understand the dialogue he was contributing to. Philosophy began with Thales, who posed the first question: what is the arche? Which means, what is the fundamental, unchanging basis of reality? His answer was that it was water, a material claim. His student Anaximander claimed that it was what he called apeiron, that which has no opposite. This was more of a metaphysical answer. Anaximenes synthesized the two claims with the assertion that the arche was air, something both physical and spiritual in nature to the Greeks. From there emerged two radical thinkers, Heraclitus and Parmenides. To understand these two thinkers, I must introduce some terminology. Being and becoming. Being is that which is unchanging and eternal, while becoming is that which changes throughout time, that which comes into existence and passes away. Heraclitus' radical proposition was that everything was in a state of becoming. In response, Parmenides asserted the antithesis, that everything is in a state of being. How can becoming exist? What does a new thing come out of? Being? Then it's just a repetition of itself. Nothing? Well, that makes no sense. Parmenides won this debate in terms of influence. But the problem was that now people were denying the existence of things like change and movement entirely. If all there was being, then nothing comes into existence and passes away. All that is simply is. These thoughts were still prominent during Aristotle's time, but there were others who believed in the likes of Empedocles, Democritus, and Anaxagoras, who each in their own way argued everything was one fundamental unchanging substance, the arche, being, but that substance gets reorganized into different structures. Thus it is true that everything is made up of something unchanging, but the quantity, structure, and preeminent qualities of that substance can change. Plato's Socrates asserted a new dualism of being and becoming, with the introduction of the world of ideas. The perceptible world is a world of becoming. Everything you see is changing, but the world of ideas is a world of being. Ideas are eternal and unchanging. So this is the main discourse Aristotle is entering, but Aristotle is a different breed of philosopher than those who came before him. He dedicates large parts of his writings to specifying definitions, and he structures everything logically. He isn't a demigod, god, poet, or homeless man. He's here to bring clarity to the convoluted discussion that is. Everyone keeps saying that all is one and that this has an obvious meaning, but what exactly do you guys mean? Is Heraclitus even talking about the same thing as Empedocles beneath his riddles? Does what Parmenides is saying truly make sense? Most of you seem to all agree that all things are one, but you could mean multiple things by saying this. Are you saying that all things are continuous? If so, then everything is many, since the continuous is divisible ad infinitum. Perhaps you mean that all is indivisible. If all was indivisible, nothing would have a quality or quantity, and so the one would not be infinite or limited, as Parmenides says. And finally, maybe you mean that all things have the same definition, which in a way is what Heraclitus is saying, in which case you are really saying that all things are nothing. We need to clear some things up. It seems impossible for all things to be one. If substance, quantity, and quality are, then whether these things exist independently of each other or not, there will be many. Qualities and quantities of a substance change throughout time, so change does occur. But what about Parmenides' argument? Well, Parmenides is forgetting about an important principle. That principle is potentiality. Things don't emerge out of nothing, or the same thing, but substances have potentiality, the potential to be other things. What is the arche then? The arche is that which has within itself the principle of motion and rest. What about my teacher Plato? Plato was wise, but confused and prone to mysticism. It would be nice if we could know everything with the certainty of mathematical truths. He did have a certain Pythagorean disposition. In other words, it would be nice to know things a priori, or before experience. But most things we know are derived from experience. Truth about reality isn't found in an ideal world above or beyond the world grasped by the senses, but rather the reality grasped through our senses is generally reliable. The shadows on the cave wall are our reality, and important truths can be derived from them. Form is not something that exists in a transcendent world. Form is in reality. Form is actuality. Form is the form that matter takes. It is the essence of a thing. Matter is potentiality. Take this apple, for example. This apple has the potential to be applesauce, but its form is that of an apple. Thus we call it an apple. That is its actuality. Even if the matter is the same in applesauce and the apple. If we smush this thing into applesauce, it would be the same substance, but it would not be the same form. This understanding of form is called hylomorphism. Another problem with Plato is that he doesn't distinguish between univocity and multivocity. Where Plato would say things partake of goodness, Aristotle would say goodness means different things in different instances. There's not one ideal idea of goodness, but this poses a problem. How do we know what something is given our linguistic limitations? How can we have a better understanding of beings? How can I, as a philosopher, better know what things are? Aristotle lays out his theory of categories. Take this apple again, for example. Beings, including this apple, have substance. The apple is made of matter. Beings have quality. The apple is red. Beings have quantity. The apple is 3 inches tall. Beings can be relative. This apple is half of those 2 apples. Beings have place. This apple is in my hand. Beings are in time. This apple is here now. Beings have position. This apple is sitting in my hand. Beings can have. This apple has a leaf. Beings can be acted upon. I throw this apple at your face. Beings can be affected. I am currently sniffing this apple. These are things that help us understand beings and give us more insight into understanding the world as it is. But what about change? What causes beings to change? To answer this, Aristotle lays out his 4 causes. First, there is the material cause, that from which something is generated or out of which something is made. For example, take this bronze statue of sweet little Diogenes. The bronze is the material cause of the statue. Then there is the formal cause, the structure which the matter realizes, and in terms of which it comes to be something determinate. For example, the formal cause of this statue is that it is the shape of Diogenes. There's the efficient cause. This is what we normally think of when we think of causes. What directly caused this to happen? The person who caused this to be as it is was the sculptor who shaped the bronze into its current shape. And then there's the final cause, the purpose or goal of the being. The bronze statue was created for the purpose of honoring sweet little Diogenes. Through these categorizations and questions, we can further understand beings in the world of experience. We can understand what they are, specifically, and why they are. But what about life and consciousness? Well, Aristotle believed that all living things have souls. Souls are the actuality of life. Soul is activity. There's a hierarchy of souls, better yet a scale of being. At the bottom, there's prime matter. Good job, Anaximander. Next, there is the 4 elements. Good job, Empedocles. And then there is inorganic matter. Then, there are plants with their self-causing nutritive souls. The totality of their psyche, so to speak, is concerned with nutrients. Next, there are animals with their more complex souls. And finally, there are humans with the most complex souls, capable of reason. Aristotle saw everything as one great chain of causation that leads inevitably to one great final cause, one prime being, God. God is the unmoved mover, the prime mover, who who set everything into motion. He has achieved his actuality simply by being. He exists outside time and space. Aristotle's God is pure mind, because God is perfect and thinking is the greatest activity. God only thinks of himself. If God didn't exist, then causation would go back ad infinitum and the universe would be unknowable. Thus we get an understanding of what Aristotle's response to the main philosophical discourse is, but Aristotle doesn't stop there. Aristotle makes advancements in logic, most famously his discussion of deduction. If all A's are B's and all B's are C's, then all A's are C's. Deductions are important because they make progress while inference is trivially true. Aristotle wrote a groundbreaking book titled The Nicomachean Ethics, in which he discussed the most culturally relevant question after Plato. Previously I told you that after Plato there was a sort of shift in the dialogue. People started to focus on what became the more culturally relevant question. What is the best life human beings can live? The best life we can live is the life that brings about the most happiness. The whole concern of both morality and political science must be pleasures and pains. This is self-evidently what people desire. Life is not meaningless because we care about being happy. The goal of man is to be happy, and it is virtuous activities that determine our happiness. Happiness and pleasure, to Aristotle, frankly, isn't just the pleasure we associate with baseness. It's tied to the aspect of humanity that makes us different, our rational faculties. He appeals to his teleological framework and says, if you want to know what happiness is, you must understand what the function of human beings is. The function of a human being must be tied to what is unique about human beings. And what is unique about human beings is their capacity for logos, for rationality. Therefore, happiness, he claims, comes from rational activity in accordance with virtue, or excellence. Happiness is deeply tied to our rationality. It comes from behaving rationally. But he doesn't follow Plato entirely with his belief in philosophy as a way to a good life. He believes there are other ways to be rational other than just philosophizing about rationality itself. One can be rational by being virtuous. In fact, in a diverse society filled with different interests, living a virtuous life is the practical ethical answer. Not everyone can dedicate their entire lives to philosophy. The job of ethics, Aristotle asserts, is not that we may know what virtue is, but that we may become virtuous. What is virtue then? Aristotle lays out his theory of the ethical mean. The ideal of how to live is between two opposing virtues. The courageous man is neither cowardly, avoiding all danger, nor foolhardy, embracing all danger. The generous man is neither a Scrooge, nor a man who gives away everything so his family has nothing. Those who wish to be virtuous, Aristotle concludes, are compelled at every step to think out for themselves what the circumstance demands, like a navigator on a ship at sea or a physician. That's the proper role of the individual. But what about the state? Before Aristotle came Plato's masterpiece, The Republic, where he lays out what is essentially an idealistic government where everything is controlled by the state, in which the wisest people rule, the philosopher class. He dreamed of a philosopher king. Aristotle's government takes a more realist approach to human nature. The problem with Plato is that he treats society like it can naturally function as one giant family, interested in the flourishing of the collective. Aristotle recognized that this isn't human nature. Human beings organize themselves into families. These families organize into households. These households into villages, and these villages into poli. We must treat society like it is not a giant family, but a collection of self-interested households. So Plato's Republic and other collectivist idealistic societies are unrealistic. So how should a poli run? Well, what is the purpose of a poli? The poli comes into being for the sake of living, but it remains in existence for the sake of living well. So we must judge the success of a poli's political structure on its ability to promote human happiness. There are some simple and obvious things a poli must do. For a poli to promote happiness, it must be just. To promote happiness, it can't force people into specific roles which they're not going to enjoy. People are different. They have differences in talents and interests. So a government must allow for diversity and free exchange to optimize happiness. That way people can find their role in society. People ought to be able to freely use their diverse talents in exchanges. This plays off of people's natural self-interest, and underneath this structure, the self-interest is mutually beneficial. You can't have happiness without freedom. And a free society necessarily requires a difference of capacities among its members, which enables them to serve as complements to one another, and to attain a higher and better life by the mutual exchange of their different services. The natural equality of all the citizens in a free state requires human beings sharing power, and to experience ruling and being ruled in turn. Aristotle acknowledges that diversity of interest means inequality of results, even a division between rich and poor. That division is a sign of a free city-state. It is a natural consequence, not something to be abhorred. For Aristotle, the goal isn't an equitable utopia where certain people control the lives of others through the state, but a more free society in which everyone strives to be more ethical. An individual's natural instinct isn't to fulfill one goal for the sake of the collective, but to fulfill a variety of goals, the variety of things we must fulfill in order to make us happy. There is this to be said about the many. Each of them by himself may not be of quality, but when they all come together, it is possible they may surpass collectively and as a body, not individually, the quality of the few best. In politics, as in house building, the best judge of what works is the user, not the maker. Aristotle supports the rule of the people, backed by rightly constitutional laws that must be ultimately sovereign. This idea was, of course, massively influential on the future of the West. However, Aristotle famously doesn't stop there. He says, women are frankly less intelligent, so men should be in charge of the household. Some human beings are by nature masters and others by nature slaves. If both parties are benefited, then it is a natural and proper relationship. Basically what he's saying is that some people are simply stupid and better off without their freedom. So we've hit sexism and slavery, but what about sexuality so that we can really cover our social bases? What was sexuality like in ancient Greece? Ancient Greece was super gay, but they had no concept of sexuality. What is most fascinating to me is how different the Greeks viewed gay men. Much of Western culture today associates gay men with femininity, but for many of the Greeks, homosexuality was considered masculine. Greek heroes were gay, and many of the uber-masculine Spartan warriors were gay. I recall reading one story that went as far as to say when a war general refused a kiss from a young man, his soldiers laughed at him, seeing it as unmasculine. Like, you won't kiss a boy, what are you, a woman? Pedophilia was rampant among the Greeks, but predominantly among the elites, so not much has changed there. Aristotle's work goes on covering biology, the cosmos, rhetoric, poetics, and more, but because this is already the longest and most dense video in this series, I'm going to wrap it up here, having covered the most influential theories in the future dialogue. After Alexander ran off to conquer the known world, Aristotle returned to Athens and started up his school, the Lyceum, which would contend with Plato's Academy. Later in life, when Alexander died and the anti-Macedonian sentiment in Athens began to boil, Aristotle had to flee Athens in fear for his life. He didn't want to go down like Socrates. Only a year later, though, he died of natural causes. Thus, our philosopher came to an end. Aristotle believed in absolute truth. Aristotle believed life has meaning and purpose. He was a powerful force against the sophistic movement. He was foundational in the establishment of different scientific fields of study. Aristotle and Plato became the figureheads of Western thought. Plato became the guiding spirit of Western idealism and religious belief. Aristotle became the grounding influence of science and common sense, and our history is characterized by their work's perpetual struggle for the soul of Western civilization. In one sense, studying Aristotle was depressing. He was a step away from the almost mythological world of Greek philosophy before him. He brought clarity and stepped further away from the Orphic influences that gave our characters a distinct charm. It can always be sad to close a chapter in the story of Western philosophy, especially one as entertaining as it has been. But the wonder underneath the whole philosophical discourse burns on. Aristotle said, "Human beings began to do philosophy even as they do now, because of wonder. At first because they wondered about the strange things right in front of them, and then later advancing little by little because they came to find greater things puzzling. Wonder is at the heart of philosophy and science, and as long as you keep that wonder alive in yourself, you will feel like you're a part of the philosophical conversation." And you are. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.